everybody. Simon here. Welcome to another episode of COVID Convos, where we talk to real people and have real conversations about wellbeing in a time of a pandemic. Got, as usual, Griggsy along tonight. How are you, Griggsy?
Yeah, really well. Really looking forward to today's conversation, Simon.
Awesome. And Kesh, how are you, buddy?
Yeah, man, feeling a sense of calm and peace today for some reason, which is really, really nice. So hopefully that'll come through.
Not going to be a usual fiery, aggravated, confrontational.
Yeah, I'll put that on hold today.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Good to hear, mate. And special guest all the way from Madrid. Welcome, Ben Weinberg. How are you, Ben?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much.
Thanks again for joining us. It's great to meet you and have you along for a conversation tonight. Ben, can you just take a bit of time to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about your background?
So currently I'm the head of school, the headmaster for the American School of Madrid, which is a mid-sized international school just outside the city of Madrid, about 1,000 students, 200 staff. I did not take a normal career path to get to this position. So for quite a long time in my life, I was pretty convinced I'd do anything but education. My father was a university professor. My mother became a special education teacher. So I went and became a commercial fisherman off the coast of Maine. And I was a builder and an organic farmer and a lobsterman for quite a number of years. Before we lived on a remote island. And then around the time my daughter was 3, we realized that having a child in the late 1900s, you couldn't have a kid whose best friend was a dog and where there were no other people there. So we moved off the island, and bit by bit, I found myself getting into education. I volunteered in a school in Vermont and then became a special education aide, then went back to university finally and got a degree in special education, and worked in rural schools in Maine for a while, and then decided to move overseas and went to a job fair in Boston and ended up with a job offer from a school in South Africa, the American International School at Johannesburg. The guy said, "You have 2 hours to decide." We took a deep breath and said yes. And that August, we moved to South Africa. I was there for 14 years, first as a resource teacher, supporting regular education classrooms. And then the school opened a satellite campus, and they asked me if I would take over running that. And so I grew it was a little school, started out with like 20 kids, and ended up when I left with 250 at the satellite school in Pretoria. And then it was time to move on for a number of reasons, personal and professional. And I had no idea where I was going to end up. And I got a call from the American School of Madrid asking if I was interested in being an elementary principal. So I moved here. I've been here 7 years. And after 2 years as elementary principal, the board was on a search for a new head of school. And their search ran into some snags, and they asked me if I'd be interested in the position. So here I am, a bit by choice, a bit by chance, a bit by the winds of fate. I don't know, but it's not the normal career path.
Wow, it sounds like a very rich and interesting career in particular, and all the different things you've done and the different parts of the world you've been in. I'm sure we could talk for hours about any particular aspect of that. I'm sure we'll get back to a couple of them, but I think, Griggsy, you had a question there?
Yeah, that's an amazing start off, Ben. It's probably one of those that we could almost hit the stop on the recording now, and that's enough. People have got a lot of information. Just interested on how given your international background, how you've seen, I guess, your time in Madrid and how that's shifted, or if that has shifted in the last couple of months with the COVID situation.
Yeah, particularly living on a small remote island gave me a very different perspective than probably most people nowadays in a largely urban culture have on the terms of self-reliance and self-sufficiency. And it's something that people talk a lot about, but have never, many people for any length of time probably have not had to be on their own or alone for lengths of time. And that's one of the big features of particularly being here in Madrid, where it's a highly social culture. People are used to kissing one another when they greet. They're used, it's a talking, getting close to, the physical space, getting close and talking, being in family groups, meeting in cafes, and all that's been turned off. And that's probably one of the most startling developments. All of a sudden, people are thirsty, they're hungry for human contact. And to see, cars go by where there's only one person allowed to go out at a time. You stand in queues that go out of the pharmacy and, you're all 6 to 10 feet apart and people wearing masks so you can't see whether they're smiling or not. People almost look furtive or guilty when they're walking their dogs. So it's a remarkable cultural shift in a society and a culture which prided itself on its warmth, on its connection, on its sense of belonging. Now they can't show that, can't demonstrate it.
Yeah, and we're obviously going through some similar stuff in Australia as other parts of the world as well. But Ben, I'm just wondering, you've obviously got some really unique experience as you've touched on there, living in isolated environment. What do you think? Are there any sort of tips or tools that you can share that might help people? I'm sure there's a period of a sort of adjustment, pretty steep sort of curve, I'd imagine, and then maybe you can sort of develop some new habits and routines, which might bring a bit of normalcy back. But
or even what is it that you learned on that island that Spain could use right now?
So the quite frequently when life changes dramatically about us, our sense is to resist, to it's a loss. It's in the early stages of loss are denial and anger and a resistance towards it. And when I lived on the island for quite a while, I was the only person there, especially in the early spring when I was out there. And I would not see another human being for perhaps weeks at a time. And I'd go ashore to go get groceries or sell lobsters or do whatever needed to be done to bring supplies back and then head back out to the island. And at first, that first moment when you turn the engine of the boat off and suddenly the silence hits you. It's a profound silence, which is something that people now are experiencing here. The traffic sounds are down. There's this silence. And if you resist it, if you push away at it, it becomes more and increasingly difficult. And all you're aware of is your loss, what you don't have. And in a sense, both the feeling of loss or melancholy and the feeling of isolation, one has to embrace them. And one has to lean into it. There was a great metaphor in an article we read as a leadership team about having difficult conversations. And the person used the metaphor of being in a kayak or a canoe going down, a set of rapids. And if you come towards a rock, your instinct is to lean away from the rock. If you lean away from the rock, you're going to tip the boat over and you're going to go for a swim. It might not be very nice. You have to lean towards the things that are difficult, not away from them. And I see and hear parents, some of them angry and taking their anger out on people through emails, teachers, because they want things to be back the way they were. Well, they're not. So you have to strike a new balance and you have to lean into these things that are there, not pull away from them. And I think there's a human reaction to, if something tastes bad, you spit it out. If something is uncomfortable, we move away from it. If somebody's acting weird on the street, we cross over to the other side kind of thing. But you can't. In this time, you have to embrace the things and actually bring them closer and step towards them that are uncomfortable because they're inside you and you can't cross the street.
I just want to pick up on that because I'm feeling recently like I've turned a corner, and in my COVID experience, And I think it has been realizing that this wave of kind of noise that has happened in the aftermath of COVID, everybody putting out resources and information, and it's all trying to fill that silence. It's trying to fill that space with things. It's pulling away in different ways. And recently, I've just been able to take more time to lean into that silence and realize what a gift it is. Like you said, like to be able to sit here and just not have cars running past all the time, and not have, you know, people walking past all the time, to sit alone with your thoughts and actually hear them. Very uncomfortable, but again, such a gift.
It's a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this is only for me. It's been like a transition in the last couple of days as well, Kesh. Talking about going from that initial phase of, I guess, resisting it and seeing the negatives, to a little bit more of a gratitude-based approach to what I'm actually able to experience here. The fact that, when will I ever get the chance to just be at home 3 weeks with my kids without any pressure to go out? There's no pressure to go out because I can't go out. Normally we'd be filling it with that, like you were talking about, I think a bit there, Ben, the noise of sort of moving here, moving there, and just putting things into our days. Whereas here we're actually getting opportunities. Like last night we were out on the lawn, and we were just had the kids on our shoulders, and we're running around and just having, like, it sounds a bit cheesy, but good old fashioned fun. So just on that note of like gratitude, Ben, because I know you were speaking a bit about it beforehand. How's that impacted your life, and I guess you can talk about professional or personal thus far?
So it's gratitude on a number of levels. When I was a kid, we went out to this small island, and at that point in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, the island was there were hardly any kids. There were no road, no ferry, no electricity, and there were a lot of old timers. And the old timers were people who had lived through the Depression and World War II. And they told the most amazing stories, and they told them again and again and again every summer. And I worked for them. I, did chores around their houses. We went and watched the sunsets together, and I hung out with these old people for a rather large part of my life. And what struck me about the stories they told about those times was they laughed. There was so much laughter about times that were tough, and the supporting one another and making do with nothing and dealing and solving problems, and this real joy in that they were able to solve simple everyday problems. And that's what they remembered. And they told these stories as though they had great meaning. And now I realize quite clearly that they did have great meaning. They were giving me some essential core of learning that they had gotten. And your kids, when they remember back, and they want to tell these stories to their children, your grandchildren, maybe great-grandchildren, they're going to remember that simple pleasures of the times when we did stuff together. And that's an immense gift and something to be enormously grateful for. And it's not going to get you into Harvard, and it's not going to get them, material wealth, and it's not going to get them anything, but it's going to define fundamentally who they are in a way that maybe nothing else could. And all that noise, all that filling up with busyness doesn't add up to anything. But the simple pleasures of doing something as a family, of hanging out together, of just being. One of the older teachers, we've been kind of waiting for him to retire for like the last 10 years. It's like, one more year. You're going to retire, Mike? No, one more year. He sent a little quote from Winnie the Pooh when Pooh has had a difficult day. And Piglet just comes down and sits next to him, sits there swinging his legs. And it's just an opportunity to say, I had a tough day today, but you were there. Nothing better or more than the simple act of being there together is necessary. And if we, as individuals and maybe collectively, can come to that realization that that's what we have fundamentally to offer one another, and that in these difficult times, the acts of recognition, of appreciation, of reaching out to one another in the simplest of ways, they they turn someone else's day and perhaps life around at that moment if they were at a low point. And each one of us, when we do that, for me anyways, every time that I felt sort of, you know, in the trough of those waves that I think most people are going through, we're up one moment and then down we go again. When I've been able to reach out and give somebody else something, an email, a note, you know, a hangout call, it doesn't matter what, my day is brighter and lighter as a result of that. And I think that enormous recognition of what we truly have to offer one another as human beings, and being grateful for that opportunity, is something that's struck me about all this. And particularly in a sense, I'm the leader of a community. I have a leadership role, formal, and people are looking for some kind of guidance in this, some kind of, you know, how do I make meaning out of this besides it's just total crap? My life is on hold, everything's frozen, my kids aren't learning what they're supposed to learn, everyone's anxious. It's like, stop, let it all go. And understand that what you have been giving is this unbelievable opportunity in the midst of great tragedy, because there's, you know, while we're having this conversation and discussing positives, there are people dying in hospitals now, and there's enormous tragedy that's hidden away from us. The front lines, we're not at the front lines in that sense, but we're at the front lines in terms of supporting one another, reaching out to one another, and helping make this be something in which we learn a lesson together.
I really love what you've brought up there, Ben. There's something really true in it that I've been circling around since all of this sort of began and we've been doing this. One of the things that was taken away from us was certainty in so many different areas. For example, me, I started a little bit of a consultancy. A lot of my work was in-person facilitation and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, one of the first things to go with COVID was all of that. So, you know, I realized my business model, quote unquote, was unsustainable, uncertain. But as I've been in more and more conversations and listened to what's going on, the one thing that has revealed itself as certain is community. It's the one thing that we have been able to rely on and will continue to be able to rely on. And as you said, the times when we tap into community, support our community, the people that are doing that the most, I see as the ones that are thriving the most, despite the tragedy and the stuff that's going on. I would love to know, from your perspective as a leader of one of these communities, what are some of the things that you've been doing to help people tap into that or support your community? Because I agree with you. I think leadership is something that is sorely needed right now in many countries, kind of lacking. Yeah.
So, I mean, our means of communication are somewhat, I mean, I'm lucky that I like to write. And so people are thirsty, they're hungry for, help us make sense of this. And leadership, besides the practical things, besides the organizing, managerial, you know, making sure that teachers have what they need and some of those things, which are frankly really difficult because we can't, I can't send packs of crayons to someone. I suppose I could order them on Amazon for them or something like that if we needed to. You know, helping people solve some day-to-day problems. Number one is showing up in whatever way you possibly can. And so I read aloud for the kids, and I'm going to start a read aloud book for the adult staff as well. And that ability to hear somebody's voice and just giving something. The sort of, I used to write like a couple times a month, a little update, here's something from the school. Now those have become once or twice a week. And they've become a chance to talk about really philosophy, how to, you know, stories that are going to, you know, storytelling is fundamental to the human experience. And so being able to tell a story that's somehow a parable, somehow a message to hold on to during this time that helps people say, oh, what I'm experiencing, A, is normal. What I'm experiencing, B, is helpful because it's me trying to make sense of it, and here's someone who's nudged my thinking along a little bit. And the response from that, from staff and from parents, has been, you know, I went to the grocery store, and there's not that many people. There's a couple moms from the school there, and they both thanked me for the things that are being said. And it's that there for staff, I've started to send out a weekly video where I sort of talk to them, just recognizing what you're doing. And just that, you know, you're not alone. And I think leadership, that sense of being there, connecting people with meaning, and pulling together the strands to create a coherent story or narrative out of all of this gives people something to hold on to. And all of those are leadership functions in a much bigger sense of the word leadership, instead of, you know, this, you know, it's not just facilitating and getting things done. I'm not running the physical school at this point, but, you know, making sure that they know they have someone when they have needs, that they know that they can go there and someone's going to respond.
And I'm going to sneak in a question before we sort of start to wind up, mate. Bit of a cheeky one, because I'm so interested in what you're talking about here. But I guess what I'm interested in is the idea of home, because it's come up a couple of times throughout our different episodes. And as somebody who's shifted around a lot in the last 20 odd years, when this started happening, did you ever question, or has it caused you to question whether you are in the right place, or whether you feel at home and miss and want to go back somewhere like that? Or does it just solidify to you that you are in the right place?
That's an interesting question. I guess after 20 years being out of the US, it's not home in that sense. I mean, the home, I'd always figured, and I read a lot of dystopian, you know, science fiction and fantasy as a kid and young adult. And I always figured when things really got bad, I'd head out to the island again, because it's self-sufficient. If you need wood, you cut it. If you need food, you can go down to the shore and gather. And I know that. It's also an incredibly harsh environment. The winters are really long, and it's a very unforgiving environment. So in some sense, that's not necessarily a realistic survivalist, you know, it's a survivalist fantasy. But I've been away for long enough that, you know, going back, and we've had a few staff who, mostly quite young ones, who have suddenly wanted to go back to the US to be closer to family. And for me, here is where I am comfortable. Here is where I have a responsibility in a community that needs me to be there for them and not to duck and you know, shirk that responsibility. I'm lucky. In many ways, Spain is stable. People are reacting well to something, and there are going to be other countries for whom the social fabric is going to be strained, if not, you know, suffer perhaps some serious rips. You know, food is good and plentiful. People are respecting authority. They understand the medical system is generally being able to cope. That's all good. Longer term is anybody's guess. But for me, that sense of home, I've always figured home is where I am. And it's my job to make the place I am feel home, rather than a specific place. Although I'll admit that there was a writer who lived and was born and grew up on this island back in the early 1900s. And she said the island was a place you felt homesick for even when you were there. And I think all of us, you know, if we're lucky, we have a place like that in our hearts. But that informs our sense of how to make where we are our home, rather than to have to go back. Because in a very real sense, you can't go home again, which, you know, to borrow somebody else's phrase.
Well, Ben, we are, over time, unfortunately. We could definitely keep talking for hours and hours, as I expected. I bet that your community and those people around you are glad you've stayed put, as you put it, and are there to help them, and them to help you as well through this tricky time we're in. But just before we close and wrap up, is there anything else that perhaps we haven't got a chance to talk about tonight that you were looking to bring up or wanted to discuss, or some further advice or a message that you'd like to get out there to the world and our millions of viewers that we've got?
to me, this, all of us have had to push the reset button in our personal lives, our professional lives, plans, the old saying, man plans and God laughs. Well, he's having a chuckle now, or she. We've had to press the reset button, and there's some good in that, because there's so much. I mean, you haven't seen, besides a few lonely voices, climate change has not been in the news because it's been swamped by other events. But there's so much in our way of being that is unsustainable, and we need to pause and reset the button and consider how we will create sustainable cultures, sustainable ways of being with one another and with the planet. And I think that's our opportunity to come out of that with that resolve, with the hope, and with the determination to make that be true.
Yeah, great to hear, Ben. I've been hearing a bit more about that stuff. Certainly resonates with me and my background and my interests. So it's something that's giving me hope as well through this tricky time. Thanks again, Ben. It's been fantastic to have you on the show. I've gotten a lot out of it. I'm sure our listeners will too. Yeah, look forward to catching up with you another time. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.